Every time I got close to 4 minutes per kilometer, my body shut me down, without pain, without warning, without debate. Not because I wasn't strong enough, but because something inside me decided I wasn't allowed to go faster. There's a very specific kind of frustration that only shows up when you're already doing well. Not when you're a beginner, not when you're inconsistent, but when you're disciplined, committed, and objectively fit. Running a 10K in 45 minutes is fast. It puts you ahead of most runners. And yet, the moment you aim for 40, something strange happens. The pace approaches 4 minutes per kilometer, and your body reacts as if you've crossed an invisible boundary. Your legs don't explode, your lungs don't give up. There's no heroic collapse. Instead, everything quietly unravels. Breathing loses rhythm, control slips, and no matter how much you want it, your body refuses to cooperate. That moment stayed with me. Because I wasn't lacking effort, I wasn't afraid of pain, I was doing what every serious runner is told to do: train harder, push more, suffer better. But the closer I got, the more resistance I felt. And that's when a disturbing thought surfaced. What if this isn't a motivation problem at all? What if my body isn't failing me, but stopping me on purpose? Hey, welcome to the channel. If you've ever felt stuck just short of a breakthrough you can't explain, this video is for you. And if you want more honest, science-driven conversations like this, subscribe to the channel. Your support is what keeps these deep explorations coming. The first wrong assumption: more effort will break it. Once that doubt took hold, it didn't make me quit. It made me push harder because that's what I'd always been taught to do. I convinced myself that effort was the answer. That if 40 minutes were resisting me, the solution had to be more intensity, more pressure, more suffering. So I doubled down. I added another hard session. I shortened the recoveries. I treated every workout like a personal confrontation, something to be won through grit alone. On paper, it looked impressive. My watch was full of fast splits and brutal days. I was tired in the way runners like to brag about, but something didn't add up. The harder I trained, the less stable everything felt. Instead of getting stronger at race pace, I became more fragile. There I could touch it briefly, but I couldn't stay. The moment I tried to hold that speed, my breathing would spike unnaturally, my stride would tighten, and a quiet panic would creep in. Not mental panic, but physiological. My body would start making decisions without my permission. That's when frustration turned into suspicion. If effort alone were the solution, this should have worked. I was doing everything the playbook promised, and yet instead of adaptation, I was getting resistance. Instead of progress, I was getting earlier breakdowns. It felt less like training and more like provoking something. For the first time, I questioned a belief I'd never challenged before, that trying harder is always the right response. What if effort, applied blindly, isn't courage but noise? What if my body wasn't asking for more force but for a different kind of understanding? Realization number 1: Sub-40 is a physiological problem. That question changed the direction of everything that followed. Because once I stopped blaming effort, I had to confront something much more uncomfortable. I began to see that the problem wasn't how badly I wanted 40 minutes. It was how my body was interpreting the demand. Breaking 40 didn't behave like a normal goal. It didn't respond proportionally to work. The jump from 50 to 45 had rewarded consistency and discipline. But 40 felt guarded, almost protected, as if the body itself had drawn a line and decided what was acceptable. That realization was unsettling. It meant this wasn't just a tougher version of the same challenge. It was a different category altogether. Sub-45 felt like fitness. Sub-40 felt like physiology, a point where the body stopped negotiating and started enforcing limits that had nothing to do with motivation or courage. I noticed it in how automatic the resistance was. There was no internal debate, no moment where I chose to slow down. My breathing pattern would break before I had time to react. My form would degrade without conscious thought. It felt less like failure and more like regulation, as if my system was saying, "This intensity is not sustainable for you, yet." That's when I stopped asking what workout I was missing and started asking a deeper question. What biological system was reaching its ceiling first? Because until I understood that, no amount of grit was going to get me past this wall. The limits of VO2 max. Once I framed the problem as a biological limit instead of a character flaw, my attention went to the place everyone points first: the engine. VO2 max had always been the headline metric, the number that supposedly defined how good you could become. I'd been taught to see it as the ceiling, the ultimate constraint. So naturally, I assumed the answer had to be there. If I could just make the engine bigger, everything else would fall into place. But the deeper I looked, the more uneasy I became. On paper, my engine wasn't small. It was already in a range that should have supported much faster running. And yet at race pace, it felt unusable, like having power I couldn't access without triggering chaos. That contradiction bothered me more than any bad workout ever had. What I started to realize was this: oxygen capacity and oxygen control are not the same thing. Having a large engine doesn't mean you can operate it efficiently at high intensity. It only means the potential is there. And potential, by itself, doesn't win races. At 4 minutes per kilometer, it felt like I was asking my system to do something it wasn't coordinated enough to manage. My heart could deliver the oxygen, but the rest of the system couldn't distribute and use it without tipping into distress. That's when a new thought surfaced, almost uninvited. Maybe the issue wasn't how big the engine was. Maybe it was the mechanism that decided how much of that engine I was allowed to use. That question led me away from horsepower and towards something far less talked about, but far more decisive. This was the first time I truly encountered the idea of lactate threshold, not as a buzzword, but as an explanation for what I had been feeling all along. I had always believed lactate was the problem, the thing that poisoned your legs and forced you to slow down. That belief shaped how I trained and how I judged effort. Pain meant failure, burn meant danger. But the more I learned, the more that story unraveled. Lactate isn't the enemy, it's fuel. My body was producing it constantly, even at moderate speeds, and under the right conditions, it could recycle and reuse it efficiently. The real issue wasn't lactate itself. It was the moment when production outpaced clearance. That precise intensity where balance tipped and the system lost control. That was LT2. Suddenly, my race experiences made sense. At around 4 minutes per kilometer, I wasn't cracking. I was crossing my red line. Past that point, acidity accumulated faster than my body could manage, and everything spiraled. Breathing, coordination, composure. Not because I was weak, but because the system was overwhelmed. That realization hit hard. Sub-40 wasn't about running faster than my limit. It was about moving the limit itself. About teaching my body to stay calm, efficient, and in control at an intensity it currently perceives as a threat. Once I understood where that red line actually was, the way I trained had to change, because you don't move a limit by attacking it blindly. That's when tempo runs stopped being just another workout and started becoming a conversation with my body. Training at lactate threshold wasn't dramatic. There was no surge of adrenaline, no sense of conquest. Instead, it was a sustained discomfort that demanded restraint. The pace felt almost deceptive, slow enough to doubt, hard enough to respect. Every instinct told me to either back off or push through. Neither was allowed. Those runs taught me something effort never had. They taught me how to stay present at intensity without tipping into panic, how to breathe when my body wanted to gasp, how to keep my stride relaxed when tension was the easiest option. The challenge wasn't surviving the burn, it was maintaining control while my system was under stress. At first, those sessions felt mentally heavier than physically hard. 30 minutes at the edge of tolerance forced me to confront my habits, how quickly I associated discomfort with danger. But over time, something subtle shifted. The same pace demanded less emotional negotiation. The chaos I used to feel at race speed began to quiet. I wasn't getting tougher. I was getting more efficient. My body was learning that this intensity wasn't a threat, that it could manage the load without sounding the alarm. And slowly, almost without noticing, that red line began to move. As my threshold began to shift, another assumption quietly collapsed, one I had never seriously questioned before. For years, I treated easy running as background noise. Necessary, maybe, but secondary. Something you endure so you can get to the real workouts. I thought endurance was built by intensity, and easy miles were just a way to fill the week without getting injured. That belief didn't survive scrutiny. The more I paid attention, the more I noticed a pattern. My hardest breakdowns never happened at the start of races. They showed up late when efficiency mattered more than speed. That forced me to confront what easy running was actually doing beneath the surface. It wasn't about pace at all. It was about teaching my body how to conserve. Low-intensity mileage trained systems I had ignored. Fat oxidation, capillary density, mitochondrial efficiency. It taught my body how to spare glycogen instead of burning through it recklessly. And in a race that lasts 40 minutes, that matters more than most people realize. Long runs stopped being symbolic endurance tests. They became prepared for fatigue itself, a way to build resilience without stress, durability without strain. They trained me to stay economical when tired, to maintain form when the system wanted shortcuts. I realized something humbling. Threshold work taught my body how to tolerate intensity. Easy running taught it how to survive it. Without that foundation, every hard effort was borrowing from a system that couldn't afford the debt. With endurance and threshold finally working together, one last question remained. Why did the same pace still feel heavier for some runners than others? That question led me to running economy, a concept I had underestimated for years. I used to think efficiency was just a byproduct of talent, something you either had or didn't. Strength training to me was about injury prevention at best, unnecessary weight at worst. But the deeper I went, the clearer the gap became. I noticed it during races. Two runners side by side, breathing differently at the same speed. One looked composed, the other on the edge. The difference wasn't heart rate or fitness, it was costly. How much energy does each step demand? Strength work changed that relationship. Heavy lifts didn't make me bulky. They taught my nervous system how to recruit muscle fibers with less waste. Plyometrics sharpened the elasticity in my tendons, turning ground contact from a loss into a return. Short strides and hill sprints weren't about fitness at all. They were lessons in coordination, reminders of how efficient speed should feel. Slowly, the pace itself changed character. 4 minutes per kilometer stopped feeling expensive. Not easy, but organized, predictable. I wasn't fighting the ground anymore. I was moving through it with intention. That was the final shift. The realization that speed doesn't come from force alone, but from reducing everything that doesn't need to be there. Once efficiency replaced force, the picture finally came into focus. The 40-minute barrier wasn't a single weakness I needed to fix. It wasn't my lungs, my legs, or my mindset in isolation. It was the point where multiple systems stopped cooperating. When the engine was strong, but the gearbox couldn't manage the load. When intensity was high, but fuel was being wasted. When fitness existed, but control didn't. That's why this barrier feels so absolute. It doesn't bend to shortcuts. You can't bully your way through it or steal time from one system to cover another. The body notices immediately. It compensates. It slows you down. What changed for me wasn't one breakthrough workout, it was alignment. Aerobic foundation supporting threshold. Threshold unlocking usable power. Strength, reducing the cost of every step. Each piece reinforces the others over time. The wall didn't disappear. I stopped crashing into it. I learned where it was, why it existed, and how to move it, patiently, deliberately, on the body's terms, not my own. And once I stopped fighting the wall, something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling lost. If you're stuck for nearly 40 minutes, I don't think you're missing discipline or desire. I think you've reached a point where effort alone can't give you answers anymore. That's not a failure, it's an invitation. A signal that the problem has changed, and so must the way you approach it. Understanding this didn't make the journey shorter, it made it clearer. I stopped chasing every hard workout, stopped measuring progress by how exhausted I felt. Instead, I began listening to what my body was actually responding to. Progress became quieter, but more reliable. This isn't about proving toughness, it's about earning control, about respecting the systems that decide how fast you're allowed to go, and training them with intention instead of impatience. The 40-minute barrier isn't there to humiliate you. It's there to teach you how the body works when limits are real. And once you learn that lesson, you're no longer guessing. You're building something that can last. In the end, what this journey taught me goes far beyond running. I learned that real limits rarely respond to force. When something truly matters, your health, your growth, your direction in life, pushing harder isn't always the answer. Sometimes resistance isn't a sign to fight, it's a signal to listen. The body, just like life, has systems. If you ignore them, they push back. If you understand them, they work with you. The deeper lesson is this: progress doesn't come from proving how much pain you can tolerate. It comes from clarity, aligning your actions with how things actually work, not how you wish they worked. Whether it's training, work, or personal goals, patience combined with understanding will always outperform blind effort. Now I'm curious to hear from you. Have you ever felt stuck at a point where trying harder only made things worse? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can learn from each other. And if this kind of thoughtful, honest exploration resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel and Phoenix. Your support is what keeps this conversation going and allows me to create deeper content like this in the future.